Hey, it's Ryan with this week's Mille Lacs Fishing Report. It is December 23rd. It's a couple days away from Christmas, which also marks the beginning of the main portion of the ice fishing season on Mille Lacs. There's a lot of guys that get out over Thanksgiving that weekend. They start walking out in the bays. But Christmas is really the days after Christmas, between Christmas and New Year's. That's when you see the main bulk of people getting out onto the main lake. You see truck traffic out on the main lake. A lot of the permanent fish houses and wheelhouses start making their way out there. So this really marks the beginning of kind of the bulk of ice fishing on Mille Lacs, the days following Christmas. There's a few things I'll go over before I get into the species-specific reports. One is ice thickness. Always check with your resorts. Personally, I've only been going out of the south end at this point. There seems to be a little more ice on the south end of the lake than there is in other portions of the lake. Where I'm at, I have about 14 inches. I've been hearing that there's anywhere from about 12 to 16 down on the south end. We've had some really cold nights this past week. We've been building quite a bit of ice on the lake. Any of the portions of the lake that were a little bit behind are probably catching up really quick. And part of the reason is that we did get snow and things were a little bit insulated. No slush, not any slush that I found or know of out here. But things were a little bit insulated, and that kind of put a damper on the ice making for a little bit. But we got, one of those blessed overnight rainstorms, and that knocked a lot of the snow down. So what there is left for snow out here, I would say the ice is, maybe 50-50 snow and ice. But the snow that is left is very hard packed down, very crunchy, and pretty minimal. It's only a few inches deep. Sometimes you get around the cracks, it may be a little bit deeper snow, but really nothing difficult to navigate. As far as fishing goes, the bite's been pretty good. This summer, the bite was a little bit tougher. Guys were grumbling about not catching the walleyes like they had been the last couple of years. The 2 years prior to this, the walleye bite was excellent out here. This past year, especially last winter, the walleye bite was tough. And during the summer, a lot of guys were kind of struggling on the walleyes, but as you got into late summer, it seemed like things actually got better during the dog days. And then when you got into the fall, we really saw an uptick in the walleye bite. So that was a really good indicator that this winter was going to be better. Now, a pleasant surprise is getting out on the ice this winter, we've been doing really well. Now, it's not like you can just go drop in on any spot and go whack your limit of walleyes, but if you're willing to put in a little bit of time and effort and check a few different areas, some areas have definitely been better than others, and you're able to go out and get limits of the keeper size walleyes. Now, some days are better than others as well. What I have noticed is some days we come out here, today specifically, came out, got our walleyes in about 30 minutes, had our limit. It happened very, very quickly. The day prior, yesterday, we went out and we worked all day. We caught a lot of fish, a lot of small walleyes, but we didn't really get our keepers until about sunset. So we definitely noticed a difference in some days being better than others, and you definitely can tell a difference some spots being considerably better than others. Where we've been fishing primarily has either been gravel or rock. And with the rocks, it seems a little more spotty. The days when they're biting on the rocks, the bite can be really good. You'll have big schools, waves of fish moving across the rocks. They're biting, you can catch them. When they're not moving across the rocks, it can be very slow up there. The gravel bars tend to be quite a bit more consistent. The thing with the gravel is when you go out to the gravel, you're going to run into a lot more small fish. You're going to run into those 9, 10, 11, 12, 14, 15, all the way up to 16-inch walleyes. You got to do some sorting in order to get your keepers. But when you're on the rocks, it seems like most of the fish you catch on the rocks are going to be keepers. Just the ratio is much better up there. It seems like there's bigger fish on the rocks, just in general, than there is on the gravel, but not quite as many of them. Well, for a big fish pattern, I haven't been running into very many big walleyes out here. Not this fall and definitely not this winter. What you notice is when you get walleyes that are over about 20 inches on Mille Lacs this year, they're absolute blimps. They're super fat. They've been eating really well. I suspect that they're eating a diet that consists primarily of tulipy. I don't know that, but just by how fat and round they get when you get those 22, 23-inch walleyes, I mean, they're just stuffed with bait. So those fish have been tougher to catch. You're still finding them. You're still seeing them on the screen. They're still coming through, but they're just a lot harder to get to commit to biting your jig when they're just swimming in a sea of bait. Now, the reason we're catching more smaller fish is Mille Lacs didn't have that great of a bait fish hatch this year. Last year it had an epic bait fish hatch, and those minnows were tiny. They were young of the year, so the little walleyes could get them. Those young of the year fish from last year have grown up. The smaller fish are having a tougher time catching them. That's why we're catching a lot more smaller fish out here. But the bigger fish are still very well fed. Now it might take till this spring before those bait fish get big enough where the bigger fish have trouble, or maybe they'll whittle them down enough, you know, feeding on them throughout the winter. But we're definitely going to see the bite get better this spring. But for this winter, I think the big fish are going to be a little bit tougher to catch, but you can definitely catch a lot of small fish on Mille Lacs. And if you work at it and look for a good spot, you can get your limit of keepers out here. Some days it happens really quick. Some days the bite is on. Other days you got to wait for those prime time moments, you know, sunrise, sunset. That's when you get your bites on your keeper size fish. Now, if you're going to be fishing the rocks, my recommendation is probably fishing anywhere from about 12 to 18 feet of water. You can fish on the tips of points. You can fish on the edges of the rock piles. If you have a really good edge, those are used like highways for the walleyes. You can sit right on the edge. You can go right up on top of the piles when the bite's good and the fish are moving. They're going across the reefs. The tops can be good as well. But a lot of times I like to focus either on the tip of a point or an edge. That seems to be a little bit more consistent of an area to get your bites. You can fish shallower. I know guys that fish shallower than 10 feet of water, and they can do really well, especially overnight. But when you get up shallow, those tend to be very hit or miss areas. If you're going out to the gravel bars, what I've noticed is if you get out to the transitions, you tend to run into more small fish. If you go up on tops of the gravel bars, especially, you know, if you have a rock pile or just a couple scattered rocks up there, those are the areas where you tend to run into more of your keepers. So we've been focusing most of our attention on the tops of the gravel piles and certain high points on the tops of the gravel bars. Those have kind of been the key areas for us. If you go to the transition, like I said, you tend to run into a lot more of the small fish. As far as techniques, it's really been one of two things. It's either been an 1/8 ounce jigging spoon with a minnow head, or it's been just a set line, plain hook, and a small golden shiner. Either one of those can catch fish. Definitely seems like the jigging spoon has been dominant some days. Some days it's like 10 to 1. Fish on the spoon versus fish on the set line. Other days you see it a little more split. It gets, you know, a little closer to 50-50. But those are the two techniques. A lot of times as the season progresses, you see the spoons, you know, kind of take the back seat, and you tend to catch more of your fish on the set line. So don't put the set line away, keep it out. Cool thing about the spoons are a lot of fun to fish with. It's really engaging. You know, you got rod in hand, you're watching the scope or the Vexlar. It's a fun way to catch them, and it's working right now. As far as cadences with the spoon, I'm fishing them pretty aggressive. You know, I keep it about 2 feet off the bottom and try to just maintain a steady cadence, just popping it up about 6 inches and just keeping a steady cadence, fishing it somewhat aggressively. I'm not doing big 3-foot pumps with it, just little pops, keeping that steady cadence until the fish come in. And then when the fish come in, sometimes I'll incorporate a pause. Sometimes it'll be a 10, 20-second pause. You got to kind of read them. If they start backing off the spoon, get aggressive again. If they come up and they keep coming towards the spoon while it's paused, just leave it there. Sometimes they'll come up and nail it. Next is the perch fishing. I can't tell you much about the perch fishing right now. I haven't spent a lot of time doing it. I went into the bays, tried it in there for a while, What I can tell you about catching perch in the bays is you're gonna get a lot of little ones. If you focus, you know, on those drop-offs that used to have the cabbage on them, that's where you're gonna find most of the perch. A lot of times that's anywhere from like 7 to 10, 7 to 12 feet of water. Those are good areas to go. You know, those perch in the bays are so darn aggressive that you darn near don't even need bait to catch them. You're gonna have to sort through a lot of tiny fish, but you can squeak out a few keepers for a meal. The main lake, the big perch out in the main lake, I'm gonna be starting on those shortly. The walleye bite's been really good, so I've stayed focused on that, but the main lake perch bite on the mud flats and the gravel bars, I think is gonna be pretty similar to last year. I looked at the DNR numbers for perch from their testing this last summer, and it looks like numbers are about the same, so I'm pretty optimistic about the perch bite this year. I think we're gonna have another great season on those. Last year we got a lot of perch in that 10 to 12 inch range, an occasional 13 out there. Once in a while you get them a little bit smaller than 10 inches, but most of what we caught were keepers, really fat, very healthy fish. It's a ton of fun, so they've bumped the limit back up again. Very excited about that. We're gonna have a great season on those. Lastly is the bays. You know, if you go fish in the bays, there's always opportunity in the bays. There's perch, walleyes, big pike in the bays. You know, you always got a shot at a 40-inch plus pike when you got a big minnow down in the bay. Any of those south end bays can be good. Basically anywhere where you can find cabbage. Now, if you're looking for a spot that may potentially have walleyes too, usually what I'm trying to do is find where the weed line kind of intersects with a hard bottom transition or a harder bottom transition. So if you can find a cabbage line that joins up to sand or especially rock or gravel in the bays, those are really key areas to get in on the walleyes. Most of the walleyes that you get in the bays, that's gonna be kind of an evening thing. You know, morning, evening, low light period, you get a little window where you get a couple walleyes coming in. That's tends to be what the walleye bite is like in the bays. For the pike, you know, that's throughout the day. Just put a big minnow down there. You can use a sucker or a big shiner on a quick strike rig. Put them down, you know, anywhere from a couple feet below the hole to about halfway down. That seems to be what works best for me when I'm fishing for the larger pike in the bays. One of my favorite ways of fishing them is cutting a big spear hole and then sight fishing with a big shiner just a couple feet below your feet. I tell guys it's kind of like fishing out of a tree stand. It's really fun. You get to watch what's going on. You get to see the big fish come in. It's really engaging. And then in between those big pike, you may have a walleye come through. You can drop a spoon for a walleye, or you can just keep busy with those little perch. You know, it's something to do, or you can sort through them and get a few bigger ones if you're looking for a meal. So that about wraps up this week's Mille Lacs Fishing Report. Sum it up, we have great ice conditions this year. You know, we're kind of past the point of having to deal with slush. There's enough ice on the lake now where if we get snow, it's not going to wreck the season. So we're sitting safe at this point. We have great ice, a great start to the year. The walleye bite has definitely exceeded expectations. The perch bite's expected to be another good perch season. If you're looking for big pike, I've heard some guys getting some real giants, some 40-inch plus gators in the bays. So there's a lot of opportunity out here. We have great ice conditions. I think it's going to be a great season on the big lake. Hopefully these tips help you out. Good luck fishing and have a Merry Christmas.